All right, and we are live. Welcome back to another round of Q&A. We're going to be answering nutrition questions, basketball questions, anything like that. So as y'all come on, say what's up. And as you guys come on as well, make sure you share the URL either up here, wherever you are. If you're on Facebook, YouTube, doesn't really matter. Click the share button, post it on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever social media platform you're on. Let's try to get as many basketball players as possible in here. And if you're watching in the past broadcast, definitely be sure to share as well, because this will be up forever, really. So if you have any nutrition questions and stuff like that, definitely make sure you watch till the end, listen till the end if you're listening on podcast form, because we're going to be diving into all of those. But let's see if anyone in here right now. Doesn't look like we do. And as we're getting started too, remember, if you haven't already, make sure you go to hoopsquiz.com, take that 3-minute quiz, find out kind of where you're messing up with your nutrition, and it'll help get you going in the right direction, because now you'll have some clarity as far as where you can improve with your nutrition, and you'll get that 3-day video series taking you through exactly what to do to get things going in the right direction. So remember, go to hoopsquiz.com and check that out. I think you'll enjoy it. So let's get into some questions now. And then as you guys come on, definitely be sure to comment down below any questions you guys have, and we'll dive into those. But first, we're going to go through a couple that we got from the Facebook group. By the way, one of the bonuses you get from taking that quiz is you get access to a private Facebook group where I'm literally in there all the time answering questions. I'm going live in there several times a week, whereas only on here once a week. But just want to let you know in case you haven't taken advantage of that already. But one of the questions we got from Isaiah Barber was asking, how do you feel about vegan diets for basketball players? And this is a question I get quite often, and it's no surprise that it comes up very often, because a lot of times you see basketball players, like at the NBA level, someone will announce that they've gone vegan. And usually you go through what's called this vegan honeymoon phase, where you go vegan and then all of a sudden you feel so much better. So like it must be the vegan diet, right? Like that's what did it. That's what's making you feel better. That's why you're performing better and less sore, less achy, not really dealing with as many injuries and stuff like that. That's it, right? It's the vegan diet. It's because you cut out meat. It's because you're not eating those animal products that you're feeling better, right? Not really. And the interesting thing is there are some pros to a vegan diet. And before it seems like I'm kind of just going to crap on it right now, I do want to say there are some beneficial things about a vegan diet in some situations. For example, by default, typically when people go vegan compared to a traditional American diet, you see an increase in fruit and vegetable intake. So one of the byproducts of a vegan diet is an increase in fruit and vegetable consumption, which is obviously a great thing. And you also tend to see a decrease in things like fast food and ultra processed foods and things of that nature. And the cool thing is that is what is explaining the benefits, not necessarily the removal of meat and animal products. It's not because you took out the steak, it's because you took out the McDonald's and now are eating plenty of fruits and vegetables. That's why you feel so much better. So hopefully that makes sense. And we'll dive into that in a second here, just taking a sip of my cold brew. Oh man, there's nothing like relying on caffeine. Once you start relying on caffeine, it's just all downhill from there. You can't really come off of it. I mean, you can, but it just kind of sucks. Now, back into the vegan diet thing. Like I was saying, a lot of the benefit you're going to see from a vegan diet at first is not really related to the removal of meat. It's simply because you're eating more fruits and vegetables. You might be eating more whole grains, and you might just be eating healthier overall. So that's where you really need to get clear on that, because a lot of times people will take those findings, or quote unquote findings, and extrapolate that to say, oh, I went vegan, I feel better, so it's because I cut out meat. Not really. And also there's the side of things that we have to consider, that when you cut out animal products, you're putting yourself at risk for lower protein intake, and the protein you're getting from plant-based sources tends to be relatively lower quality compared to animal-based sources. Like the protein you're going to get from something like wheat or pea protein or something like that, not really the highest quality. Actually, pea protein can be pretty high quality. It actually is one of the few complete plant-based proteins, but most plant-based proteins are incomplete proteins, so they don't have the full range of the essential amino acids and don't really provide you with all the building blocks to make muscle growth happen. So as a result, you actually need more plant-based proteins to get the same effect and to make up for that difference, and a variety of plant-based proteins, because again, a lot of them are incomplete or don't have all the essential amino acids that you need. So it's a weird situation because on a vegan diet, you need more protein, but it becomes more difficult to meet your protein needs as it is because you're cutting out several main sources of protein. So it's something to consider. And that's an example of where going vegan, you can make it work if you plan for it very effectively, but it just makes it harder. And you can see a lot of those, same benefits by including high quality animal proteins in there and high quality animal products. The thing with a lot of studies looking at vegan diets or looking at the removal of meat from diets is that they lump red meat into like the same categories. So a Big Mac from McDonald's is red meat, sure, but so is a grass-fed steak. And it's undeniable that there are differences in quality there. So those are all things that we have to consider. And not to mention that if you cut out animal products, you put yourself at risk for more nutrient deficiencies like vitamin B12, like iron. You can get iron from plant-based sources, but it's non-heme iron. So it means it's not as bioavailable and it's not as effective versus heme iron that you're going to get from animal sources like red meat and things like that. And that's obviously very important. There are some things you can do, like you can add vitamin C to iron sources, like drinking or like having like an orange with a source of plant-based iron can actually increase the absorption of it. But nonetheless, that's another example of the planning that it takes to actually do a vegan diet correctly. So I know I've been kind of going all over the place with this and saying a lot right now, but the main takeaway there is that sure, you can go vegan and you can be successful with it. I have clients that are vegetarian. I don't have any completely vegan clients right now, but I have a couple of clients that are vegetarian and they're doing totally fine. But they also understand that they need to plan for it more and they need to make sure they're hitting their protein intake. It might take a little bit of extra planning and extra work to make that happen. So if you're someone who's just getting started with nutrition, or you don't really need to go vegan for ethical reasons or religious reasons, which those two reasons, by all means, I respect that. Like, go ahead. And like I said, there are ways to make a vegan diet work. But if you don't have to do that for ethical or religious reasons, then there really is no reason to. In general, a plant-based diet, so a diet that includes plenty of plants like fruits and vegetables and whole grains, is a great call. But a plant-based diet and a vegan diet are very different. That's one thing that Game Changers film didn't really do a great job of illustrating. A plant-based diet just means you eat plenty of plants. That's fine. But you don't need to cut out meat to do that. You don't need to cut out meat to get all those benefits that you're going to get from all the fruits and vegetables and whole grains that you're eating. So my recommendation, and what works for most basketball players, is don't cut out meat, still eat it, eat high quality sources of meat. I mean, obviously, if you're having McDonald's Big Macs every week or every day, probably not a great look, but eat high quality sources of animal-based proteins, along with plenty of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and things like that. And you'll be in a good spot. And you can elicit all of the potential benefits of a vegan diet without actually going vegan, especially if you enjoy meat. Like if you like a good steak now and then, don't go vegan, eat the steak. It's fine. You can get all the benefits you get from a plant-based diet from a diet that includes animal-based proteins. And it'll make it easier because you won't have to plan for potential nutrient deficiencies in most cases, and you won't have to take into account the decreased protein quality of plant-based protein sources. So that's my overall thoughts on that. In general, I wouldn't recommend it unless it's for ethical or religious reasons. If you want to experiment with it, by all means, go ahead. Just understand that it's going to take a lot more planning. And for most athletes that don't plan that much with their nutrition anyway, they're not going to put in that extra planning, and it's just going to fall flat on its face, and it's not going to be a good look. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any follow-up questions as you guys are coming on live, and by the way, if you're live right now, share this link, share the URL on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever you can share the link. I'd really appreciate it. And we're going to dive into some of the chat questions right now. I see some right now, but hopefully that answers the question on the vegan diet and clarifies that a little bit. And last thing on that, the Game Changers documentary is not a valid source of evidence for a vegan diet. Can we just make that extremely clear? It's not a valid source. It's a documentary. You have to understand documentaries, even if there was a documentary on the complete other side of the spectrum, like a carnivore documentary or something like that, most of the time documentaries are just entertainment. They're meant to be entertaining and engaging, and Game Changers does a really good job of making it entertaining and making a vegan diet seem like, whoa, all these pro athletes are doing it, I should be doing it too. But look deeper. A documentary is not peer-reviewed scientific evidence. So look to those sources and look to professionals in the space to actually get sound advice, unbiased advice. Like, I have nothing against vegans. I don't care if you go vegan. I just need you to understand the potential ramifications and plan for that. If you can do that, by all means, go vegan. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with it morally, and some might argue that morally it's better. But in terms of nutritionally, just understand the planning that comes along with that. So, okay, I'm driving that one into the ground at this point. Hopefully y'all get that point, but that's my thoughts on that. Now, getting into the questions. Cam, I know you sent me a DM. I apologize. I've been crazy busy the past couple of days, just getting everything dialed in for the program. And yesterday I was just exhausted. So I was kind of just doing my own thing yesterday. But to answer your question, the question is, I have a big hoop session tomorrow. What can I do to prepare on the nutrition side today in the moments before the game to maximize my performance? So number one, for immediately before the game, there's a whole video on the YouTube channel going over like your pre-workout nutrition. And that applies for pregame as well. But you're going to want to get some protein, 20 to 40 grams of protein, and plenty of carbohydrates as well to top off muscle glycogen stores and put you in the best position to perform at a high level going into that session. Now, leading up to it, and this is a really interesting conversation. First of all, don't get so caught up in like what you're doing the day before or what you're doing the day of. A lot of athletes think that they can eat like crap all year and then like get it together the week before a game or the day before a game, and they're going to be great. Now, pre-workout nutrition, pre-game nutrition, even the day before nutrition does matter, but on a larger scale, and I'm sure you're doing this, I'm not saying you have been eating like crap or anything, but on a larger scale, leading up to it, you should really be eating right and have your nutrition somewhat dialed in year round. There should be a solid foundation set well before game day or well before the week your season starts, before you realize, oh crap, like I need to get my stuff together. Now, with that being said, if you finally come around and you're like, you've been eating like crap and you're like, okay, I should probably get this going in the right direction, make that change. Like, don't use that as an excuse not to make that change. But in general, you want to have that solid foundation of nutritional habits well before game day or well before you need to perform at the highest level. So you already have those habits dialed in, and it's not something that you need to completely overhaul. Now, assuming that you do have those basic habits dialed in, what are some things you can do before a game, the day before a game and right before a game to make sure you're in the best position to succeed? Number one, make sure you're eating plenty of carbohydrates today. Make sure you don't need to go like full carb load mode like an ultra endurance athlete would, but eat plenty of carbohydrates. And usually if you're following a relatively sound approach to your nutrition, you're already going to be eating plenty of carbohydrates as a basketball player. So you don't really need to change too much there. Maybe increase by 25 or like 50 grams or something like that. But you honestly don't need to change a whole lot, but just make sure you do get plenty of carbohydrates in today to make sure that your muscle glycogen stores, which are pretty much your fuel stores, are all topped off. And then when you wake up in the morning, it really depends on what time the game is at. But in general, if you have a game, I'm not sure what you mean. I'm not sure what you mean by hoop session, but I'm going to assume that means like a game or pickup games or something like that. If that's the case, then you're definitely going to want to get a pregame meal in. I would not go into that fasted, especially if it's a longer session and you're going to be playing at a high intensity. Going into a workout where it's like an hour, maybe 2 hours, like first thing in the morning, fasted is fine. I wouldn't stress over that. As long as you get your post-workout meal in, you're going to be good. Now, in a situation where it's a longer session or a game or pickup games, like I just said, you're definitely going to want to get a pre-workout meal in. And the structure of that meal is going to be 20 to 40 grams of protein, plenty of carbohydrates, relatively low fiber. I wouldn't go with something like quinoa right before you step out onto the court. You might have some gas, you might be uncomfortable. Go with something like white rice or something like that. And then you're also going to want to keep fat pretty low. Don't go crazy with it. You don't have to completely eliminate it, especially if you're eating longer before. So if you're eating about 2 hours, 3 hours before, you have some time. It's not the end of the world if you have a little bit of fat, but I'd keep it within 5 to 10 grams of fat with that meal. And like I said, you're going to want to also limit your fiber intake. Again, you can have some fruits, you can have some vegetables, but I wouldn't purposely load up on those right before you play, just because the fat and the fiber both could potentially contribute to digestive distress and bloating and gas and things like that that are going to make you uncomfortable going into your game or your session or your longer workout, whatever the case may be. And if you're uncomfortable, you're probably not going to perform to the best of your ability. The main thing you need to be concerned with on game day or before a very important practice or a tryout or something like that is comfort. How are you feeling? I don't really care about the specific numbers of the meal. Obviously, that's important and you want to have that somewhat dialed in, but I care the most about how you feel. So, like I said, for some people, maybe not a huge meal is necessary. Maybe a huge meal or a bigger meal makes them feel slow and lethargic. For some people, if they go into a fasted or just on a smaller snack, they're going to feel starving and they're not going to be able to perform to the best of their ability. So you really got to test this out. And obviously, it's not really in season right now. Maybe it's an AAU tournament you're talking about, but for the most part, people aren't really playing games right now. So use this as an opportunity to test things out if you haven't tested things out in the past. Because by the time your actual like real season comes around in, I think it's March 2021 at this point, ideally you'll have your game day routine on the nutrition side of things dialed in already. You'll know exactly what you're doing. You don't need to guess. So maybe that testing starts tomorrow and you start to figure out, okay, this works well, this doesn't. Like, for example, I had steak this one day before going to play and I didn't feel so great. I had chicken breast the next time I went to go play and I actually did feel well. So really just pay attention to how you feel and tailor your food intake off of that. Does that make sense though, Cam? Let me know in the comments below if that makes sense, if that kind of clarifies things. But in general, again, for those of you watching, those of you listening in the podcast, don't wait till the day before to start worrying about your nutrition. And Cam, I know you're not doing this, and I'm not saying you are, but a lot of people do. A lot of people will message me saying, hey, I have a game tomorrow. What should I do? And I ask them, like, what does your diet look like? And it's not good at all. Like, they're eating 1-2 meals a day, fast food every other day, and it's just crazy. And they think that one day of quote unquote good eating, I hesitate to use the term good there, but one day of proper eating is going to turn everything around. It can help, but at the same time, it's not going to make or break anything if the foundation of your nutrition plan just is not there. By the way, on that note, the Hoop Nutrition program starts on Monday, and I'm super excited for it. There's I think there's 10, 11 or 12 players in there for the first round. So that's going to be exciting. We're going to take them through exactly how to build their nutrition plan. If y'all are interested, it's Saturday as of me recording this. If you watch this before Monday, let me know and we can get you in there potentially. If you missed it, I apologize. It won't be opening up again until October or so. So be on the lookout for that when that opens up. But I'm super excited about that. I was just making some final edits on one of the video lessons that's going up during week 1. And yeah, it's going to be a great experience for the athletes in there. So exciting stuff. Now it looks like we have some questions. A couple of pickup games for a couple hours. Okay, cool. And then I've had a consistently clean diet since March, good amount of carbs, proteins, and some fats. Cool. Okay, so if you have a good foundation, then yeah, I wouldn't change too much. Maybe potentially eat a little bit more carbs today, but there's no need to drastically overhaul anything, assuming you have a solid foundation in place. Maddie was good. I appreciate you tuning in as always. And to answer your question, for those of you listening in, the question is, so in PJF Performance post, so Paul Favorites, arguably the best trainer out there in terms of basketball players and like vertical jump, he says there are 3 categories we fall into: need to lose fat, need to gain weight, need to lose fat, and build muscle. Is there any objective way to determine this? I mean, objectively, in terms of like plugging your age, height, weight, and stuff into a calculator to figure out if you need to gain muscle or lose body fat, not that I'm aware. I'm sure there's some sort of calculator, but honestly, you probably know. Like, you probably know if you need to gain muscle, if you need to lose body fat, and if you need to do a little bit of both. And most of the time, basketball players will probably fall into the category of needing to build muscle, especially if you're a teenager, unless you're very overweight and you have a lot of body fat to lose, you're probably not going to benefit a ton from going into a cut. If you have a lot of body fat to lose and you're in a situation where it really is slowing you down and impacting your performance on the court and your explosiveness and your power and your strength and your speed, then sure, potentially cutting down a little bit, especially if you're like in your 20s already or older than that, that could be beneficial potentially if you go about it the right way. If you're a teenager and you're an otherwise healthy weight and relatively lean, most basketball players don't need to lose a ton of body fat. And most of them would benefit from just focusing on, one, performance. That's the thing too. Yes, focus on gaining muscle, but what are we gaining muscle for? I think the messaging around gain muscle for basketball, and I do this too because it gets your attention, like you want to gain muscle. But we have to always tie that muscle gain goal back to what are we trying to do on the court? We're trying to improve your performance on the basketball court. That is the number one goal, regardless of whether you're in those 3 categories: need to lose fat, need to gain weight, need to lose fat, gain weight, lose fat, gain muscle at the same time. Doesn't matter where you're at. Each of those goals, whatever one you choose, should always go through the lens of, is this going to improve my performance on the basketball court? So if you're already an otherwise healthy weight in the body composition, like I'm not saying 6% body fat, but I'm saying 8 to 12%, even under 15% body fat, you probably don't need to cut a bunch of body fat. I would focus on performance and getting stronger in the gym and putting on lean muscle, because as you get stronger, you're going to put on muscle most likely. Obviously, you can get stronger without putting on muscle and increase your relative strength, yada, yada, yada. But most likely, especially if you're a younger player, as you get stronger, you're going to gain muscle mass and you're probably going to perform better anyway. So for most younger players, I would much rather see you try to just get stronger in the gym and perform better in the gym and ultimately build muscle mass. And usually when you do that correctly, like as long as you don't go into a quote unquote dirty bulk, when you do that correctly, you'll end up looking better on the other side. I think a lot of players who think they need to cut to get lean and are doing so because they want to look good don't really have a ton of muscle anyway. And when you cut and try to lose body fat and try to get super lean when you don't have a lot of muscle, one, it's not helping your performance at all. And 2, you kind of just end up looking skinny fat. So those are just things you need to consider. I have a YouTube video talking about, should you bulk, should you cut? But in general, I think those categories make sense. I just think it's important to add on to that. The way to determine which one of those categories you fall into is which one is going to help you perform better. So if you're really overweight and actually are carrying quite a bit of body fat, then yeah, losing some body fat will probably help you out. If you're very underweight and need to get stronger, need to get bigger to hold your own with your competition, and that's going to help you perform better, then yeah, you need to gain weight. If you're already in a position where you're relatively lean already and you're performing really well and physically you're up to par or above par relative to your competition, then yeah, maybe focus on really slowly changing your body composition, kind of recomping, build muscle, lose fat, and mainly focusing on performance in the gym. So that's kind of how I would approach it. It's tough because everyone wants like a very cut and dried, oh, this is when you do this. This is when you do this. This is when you do this. And it's tough to say because it's so individual, but that's roughly that's my framework when I think about that. Cold brew. Loved it. Love it. But apologize for that awkward silence. Got an ice cube in my mouth on the podcast. Probably like, what's going on right now? Where did I go? But I'm still here, and looks like we have another question. Does having a lot of muscle mass make you slower? Because I know, because as you know, I'm hella paranoid that my muscle mass will decrease my quickness. Muscle mass in and of itself, it's going to be very difficult to put on enough muscle mass to like genuinely slow you down. Like basketball players and most people in general drastically overestimate the amount of muscle mass that they can actually put on, like, and the speed at which they can put it on. And it's like you're not going to become bodybuilder jacked overnight. That's just not going to happen. So I wouldn't be so concerned about that. Now, can you put on weight too much quickly, and can that make you slower? Absolutely. And if you go into this dirty bulk sort of thing and just put on a bunch of weight, whether it be muscle and fat, of course, fat's going to slow you down. And if you're putting on a bunch of extra fat that you don't need to put on, yeah, it's going to slow you down. But really, I wouldn't be too concerned about that if you're going about this the correct way and really taking it slow and being patient with it, especially if you're reflecting and making sure you're keeping track of metrics as far as how you feel in the gym, what your training performance is like. If you notice yourself starting to get slower and not feel great on the court, then maybe you're going too fast. Don't overthink this. If you're still feeling really good in the court and you're feeling better and stronger and faster and more explosive on the court, then you're probably fine. You probably haven't put on too much weight. If you're putting on weight and you notice yourself kind of feeling a little off or a little bit sluggish or slower, then maybe you're going too quickly. Maybe you dial it back. Just be super objective with it and look at what's actually happening. If you're seeing improvement, then you're fine. If you're not seeing improvement, or if you're taking steps backwards, then make a change. Just look at the data of what's actually happening and base your decisions off of that. That makes it a whole lot easier. It makes it a whole lot less stressful, and it just keeps it super simple. Athletes love to speculate, and people in general love to speculate on, oh, should I do this? Am I doing this right? Is this working? Is it not working? You have very clear data if it's working or if it's not working. If you're feeling better and you're getting stronger and your weight room numbers are going up, your speed, if you're keeping track of metrics in your speed drills or whatever you're doing there, is improving. If your conditioning objectively feels better, or subjectively, wrong word there, subjectively feels better on the court, you feel more powerful, more explosive, and you don't have any issues with stamina or feeling like you're slow, then you're probably not gaining weight too quickly. So I wouldn't overthink it. Yeah, just simplify it. Keep track of things. So keep track of your weights in the gym. Keep track of your weight, obviously. Keep track of, if you have a way objectively to keep track of your speed or how you feel, whether it just be rating it on a scale of 1 to 5, like how good you feel on the court or how agile you feel on the court, or if you have a certain drill that you do that's timed for speed and you can time that and see if that changes over time, if it's improving, if it's not improving, then that way you can simplify that decision-making process and not really overthink it. Because a lot of times that overthinking leads to you ending up in this cycle of, okay, I want to put on muscle mass. So then you go and put on muscle mass, and then you gain some weight. Then you freak out because you're worried about if you're gaining weight too quickly. Then you cut it back down. And then now you're back at square one because you cut down weight too quickly. And then you're like, oh crap, I need to put on muscle, and you can gain more weight. And then you freak out again and you cut back down again. And it's this constant cycle of like making a little bit of progress and then going right back, making a little bit of progress, going right back. And so many basketball players struggle with this all the time. And you really just have to commit and use your metrics to guide you, use the data to guide you so you can be confident that you're making the right decision. Because obviously you don't want to put on 30 pounds because you're like, oh, screw it, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to overthink it. But then you end up screwing yourself over. So use metrics, but don't overthink it, and make those decisions based on the objective data, and you should be good. And guys, remember, if you haven't already, hoopsquiz.com, take the quiz. It'll take like 2 minutes. You get that free 3-day video series. The reason I keep talking about it is because it's super valuable. And if you haven't already taken it, you're really missing out. And not to mention, you'll get access to the Facebook group. If you're watching this in the Facebook group, you already have access to it. But if you haven't gotten in there yet, take the quiz, get the free video series. And it's actually individualized depending on what the result of the quiz is. So the people who get the underfueling mistake are getting a completely different video series than the people who get the poor sleep mistake. So it's super individualized to what you need in particular. So the URL is www.hoopsquiz.com. If you're watching right now, you see it scrolling down there. Where is it? It's going to show up on the screen right now. Right there. Following along. Type in that URL, take that quiz. If you're on the podcast forum right now listening in, it's in the show notes below. Take it, get the video series, and actually start using nutrition to improve your performance, because that'll put you in the best position to make this next year, this coming year, your breakout year. And that's what I really want for you. So that's why I really want you to take that quiz. If you don't take it, it's cool. Plenty of free content here too. And not to mention, the quiz is free. Like there's absolutely nothing to lose by taking it, and there's a lot to gain. So getting into the next question. Do you agree with this statement? No matter our goals, we should always have a high protein intake in our diet. Assuming you're an otherwise healthy individual, like there are some medical conditions that would require you to regulate your protein intake or certain aspects of your protein intake. Assuming you're an otherwise healthy individual and don't have any of those things happening, which if you're watching this, you most likely are. If you're not, you would very well know, because you would have had that conversation with a doctor. But if you're an otherwise healthy individual, relative to the recommendations out there, a high protein intake would most likely be beneficial in the vast majority of situations. So really, I usually don't recommend someone goes below 0.8 grams per pound of protein. Let me repeat that so I don't confuse anyone. 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. And usually where I recommend people start is 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. You can take that up as high as 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. And in some cases, I mean, you can go higher. Would it be beneficial? Not really, but it's not going to really hurt you. And those would be kind of like the 3 benchmarks for protein intake. And relative to the recommendations from the RDA of like 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is just very low for athletes. Relative to that, I would consider that high. And most of the time in research, I believe the threshold for high protein intake is 1.6 grams per kilogram. The conversions, people use grams per pound, grams per kilogram. The conversions get a little weird. But overall, yeah, I would say depending on, like, regardless of the goal, if you're an otherwise healthy individual, like if you're trying to chase muscle gain, if you're trying to chase fat loss, if you're trying to chase maximum performance, your protein intake is going to need to be pretty high. Now, should you go out and eat 300 grams of protein per day? Probably not. But anywhere between that 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, you'll probably be fine. And that's going to support most goals out there. No athlete is really going to benefit from a much lower protein intake, especially over an extended period of time, because it's going to help you support muscle recovery. So even if you don't try to change your body composition at all, it's going to help you support muscle recovery. If you're trying to gain muscle, obviously it stimulates muscle protein synthesis. If you're trying to lose fat, it also stimulates muscle protein synthesis and helps to offset muscle protein breakdown. So regardless of the goal, it's going to help you out a lot. And not to mention, protein is not just related to muscle growth. It's also important for a number of different factors in your body. And there's proteins in every cell in your body. I believe there might be like some obscure exception to that rule. But in general, there's proteins in every cell of your body doing very important functions, whether it's like transcription factors or membrane transporters or neurotransmitters in your brain. A lot of those are made from amino acids. Hormones like insulin is a peptide hormone made from amino acids. things like creatine is an amino acid that you get from your diet as well. You can make it, but you also get some of it from your diet, from like protein sources. That's going to help obviously with energy production. And there's a lot of micronutrients that come along with most protein sources. So overall, a relatively high protein intake is going to be beneficial regardless of the goal. Again, if you're a healthy overall individual. Yeah, Maddie, I agree. Game Changers is just it's not a good documentary. Most documentaries aren't a good source of, like I was saying earlier, a good source of scientific information regarding nutrition. So take whatever you hear from any sort of documentary with a grain of salt. There are a lot of flaws. Like, for example, in Game Changers, they tried to tell you that gladiators were vegan. They looked at one subpopulation of gladiators, and it wasn't even I don't think it was even a scientific study. There was just so many things wrong with that. And on the subject of gladiators being vegan, they weren't. If a subpopulation of gladiators were vegan, it wasn't because they were actively trying to avoid meat. It's because of their geographical location required them to follow a vegan diet, because of the resources they had available or the resources they were lacking, not because they were like, oh, meat's bad for you, I'm not going to have meat. Like, that's not what happened. So it's just, there's so many facts. Like, there's so many things wrong with documentaries. It's terrible. All right. Next question we got: Does your nutritional periodization change for your clients now that the COVID stuff is making a longer off season that will last up until March 2021? For a lot of my clients, not really, just because most basketball players, the nutrition prescription during the off season is going to be very similar to the nutrition plan during the in-season phase. For some athletes, the energy demands might change. Like for athletes that honestly don't get a lot of playing time, their energy demands might go down a little bit as you go into season. For athletes that log 40 minutes a game and are a key player on their team and they're playing night in, night out, the energy demands might go up during the season, or they might not change that much. So that really depends on the individual athlete and their situation. But overall, it doesn't really change much unless they were going through a fat loss phase. In terms of my basketball players, I only have one guy right now who is going through a fat loss phase because he's a basketball player and a football player. So he's trying to lean down a little bit. And that's one of the cases where he's benefiting from it. He's down 20 pounds and he's feeling a lot better, a lot lighter. But other than that, not really, because the approach to fuel performance during the off season and the approach to fuel performance during in season are very similar. The only thing that might change is maybe a slightly increased or decreased energy demand. And that's just going to be individual based on the athlete, not really an overarching principle, specific, like generalized to all of the athletes that I work with. So let me know if that makes sense in the comments. Yeah, nutritional periodization is something that's very, very important, very, very overlooked by a lot of athletes. And for those of you that might not know what that means, you might be wondering, what is nutritional periodization? It's basically the idea that you have different approaches to your nutrition in different parts of your year. So relative to your in-season, immediately post-season, your off-season, and your preseason, there's 4 main phases to it. And the nutritional demands of each of those phases change. So a lot of athletes make the mistake of eating the same exact way year round, and it can cause a lot of issues. So for example, if you're someone who eats to fuel performance and you're eating really well during season, but you keep eating that same exact way, even when you're not doing as much, there's not as much activity going on in the off season or whatever, maybe your activity, maybe take a break, maybe go on vacation or something, and you keep eating that same way, you might gain some unwanted weight. Or vice versa, if you eat super clean and you technically are meeting your energy demands at certain points of the year, when you get to a point of the year where your energy demands go up and you need more calories, more carbohydrates, and you don't actively make that change, not going to be a good look. It's just not going to be a good look in terms of performance, in terms of injury risk, in terms of illness risk, in terms of how you feel off the court as well, it's just not going to be a good idea. So to avoid both of those negative situations and put you in a position where you're quite literally making progress year round, not making progress and then taking a step back and then making progress, taking a step back, like you're progressing in some way, shape, or form all the time. We can accomplish that through nutritional periodization. That's actually week 8 of the Hoop Nutrition program. We're diving deep into that and teaching athletes how to periodize their nutrition effectively. So super excited about that. But in general, that's how you would approach it. And I'm actually going to do a podcast in the coming weeks or coming months. I was actually sitting down yesterday, planning out all my content for the rest of August through the end of September. And there definitely is going to be a podcast talking about nutritional periodization, and I believe a couple of YouTube videos as well talking about it. So I will be diving deeper into that, but it is a super important topic and a super important concept to wrap your head around, because it's going to save you a lot of frustration and a lot of plateaus. And you can quite literally avoid plateaus by using nutritional periodization. So important question. It's a good question, but to circle back and just kind of wrap that one up, it's not going to change that much, but obviously it's going to depend on the athlete. Yeah, transcription factors. Yeah. AP biology. That was a fun class. But as you guys, I know we got 3 people watching right now. Let me know if you have any other questions below. I think we have a couple more from Instagram, the questions box, and from the Facebook group, which, by the way, hoopsquiz.com, join the Facebook group for free. I'm going live in there like every day. Almost, except for Saturday, because technically this is going live in the Facebook group too. So yeah, but there's a lot of free resources in there. Let's see. Let me pull up the questions box. Bro, like whenever I post a questions box, there's always those spam comments of just like bots. Like people use bots to like answer polls on your story or like post questions in your questions boxes, and it's so stupid. Let's see. Oh damn, y'all are really okay. I posted a poll on my story, and that post I made this morning talking about where is it? That's terrible. We're talking about how cold brew is the best way to drink coffee. If you don't know that by now, figure it out. But 33% of you agreed with me. 67% disagreed with me and said that iced coffee was better. And that's blasphemous. That's just not okay. Iced coffee is watered down and it doesn't have as much caffeine and it just doesn't taste good. But okay, here we got some questions. Let's see. Best energy boosting sports drink. From what I've heard, actually, I made a post about this on my story, and someone actually brought something to my attention. Apparently, the electrolyte profile, the mineral profile in Gatorade is a bit more optimal than the mineral profile in something like Body Armor or one of those sports drinks. So based on what I know now, I would recommend Gatorade as like the sports drink to go with if you're looking for a sports drink, or you can kind of make your own carbohydrate solution. So yeah, in general, I would go with Gatorade. Is it a make or break thing? Like if you really enjoy something like Body Armor and you want to go with that, it's not going to be the end of the world. But if you're really looking to optimize everything you can, I'd probably go with Gatorade. This is a good one. So Jacob asked, if you're bulking for a skinny hooper, do you need to eat clean all the time? And again, here's where I like to recommend the 80-20 rule. So a lot of athletes and basketball players think that they need to cut out all their favorite foods and eat super clean when they're following a nutrition plan. And in a muscle building situation specifically, that can actually come back to haunt you and make things more difficult, because when you eat clean, which means eating a lot of whole unprocessed foods, which in and of itself is great, but when you do that, you tend to eat less calories. And it's a little bit more difficult to meet your overall calorie needs for the day. So that's where you have to kind of strike a balance. And for most people, I usually recommend the 80-20 rule. But for an athlete who's trying to bulk up, or a basketball player who's trying to bulk up, and they're maybe struggling with it and not able to get enough calories in, the weight hasn't gone up on the scale, you don't really look any different, you're kind of just stuck at this plateau. In that case, what I would do is shift that 80-20 rule to a 70-30 rule. and maybe include a little bit more lower quality, more calorie dense foods like ultra processed foods. Again, don't go crazy with it. I'm not saying eat fast food and donuts and candy every single meal, every single day, but you can be a little bit more flexible and eat foods that are going to make it easier to meet your calorie needs, because it doesn't matter how healthy the food is. If you are in a calorie deficit, you're probably not going to maximize muscle gain. So we got to get your calories up. And one way to do that is to actually increase the flexibility of your diet. And this is where context is very important. You can't get so caught up in I need to eat clean, because in your case, that might actually hurt you. Of course, again, I'm not saying eat fast food every single meal, but give yourself a little bit more flexibility. And it doesn't even have to be fast food. It can be like other things that you wouldn't think are quote unquote clean or healthy. You can give yourself that flexibility and make it easier to meet your calorie needs and thus get muscle growth going. In some cases, for athletes that have to eat like an absurd amount of calories, for example, a football player I was working with last year had to eat 6,000 calories a day. It's 285. He's trying to put on weight, which is tough as a 285 offensive lineman. To do that, we had to go more towards a 60-40 rule. Now, for most athletes, 60-40 is a little bit liberal there. It's a little bit too loose, but it can be necessary in some cases. For most athletes, I recommend 80-20 rule. 80% of your food coming from whole and processed sources. 20% of your food's coming from kind of, I don't even know. There's so many different opinions on how to describe these types of foods. No one wants to say cheat foods. I agree, cheat food is not a good term, but lower quality options. 20% should be coming from that. And then you could potentially increase that flexibility if you need to get your calorie intake up. And that's really the only way to do so. Now, other ways that you can get your calories up without sacrificing quality is go with more calorie dense foods. Like there's plenty of quote unquote healthy foods that are calorie dense. For example, white rice. I have it with almost every meal and it's super calorie dense. It's super carb dense. And it's not going to make you very full because it's very low fiber. So you can use that to get calories in, to get carbohydrates in, to fuel that performance, to fuel that muscle gain without feeling super full. Other things like high fat foods, like for example, having some extra peanut butter in your smoothie, having some extra, an extra handful of nuts, having some extra olive oil on your salad or your dinner can be a really easy way to add some extra calories in to boost that and get you into that surplus to build muscle. Also, liquid calories, like I was saying, a smoothie. Smoothies are a great way to easily increase your calorie intake while also keeping food quality high and not sacrificing that, because you can make a smoothie really, really healthy and get plenty of micronutrients and get lots of fruits in there, even some vegetables like spinach. I've also heard carrots apparently don't really change the taste. I haven't tried that personally, but apparently carrots don't change the taste of the smoothie. So you could try that as well. I've heard people use kale. Again, haven't really tried that one, but if it doesn't change the taste, then I guess go for it. But you can toss plenty of micronutrients in there, and then also plenty of high calorie sources like nut butters. And then you get your protein powder in there to support muscle protein synthesis, and your liquid. If you need to get your calories up, you can include whole milk instead of low fat or a non-dairy alternative. So there's a lot of different things you could do there in terms of smoothies to get your calorie intake up. So there's a lot of different strategies we can use to get you into that calorie surplus without necessarily sacrificing all that food quality. So to answer that question and just kind of bring it full circle, I agree that in some cases you might need to get more flexible, and that could actually be very beneficial to get your calories up. Now, would you want to do that forever? Not really, but it can be a good short-term tool. But there's also plenty of ways to increase your calorie intake without sacrificing food quality to the degree where it's going to negatively impact your performance. So those three things that I mentioned, the liquid calories, the more calorie dense foods, and what was the third thing? Liquid calories, calorie dense foods. There was one more thing. There was one more thing that I recommended, but it's not coming to me. But nonetheless, that should help. Hopefully that answers that question. Oh, we're getting to that point of the episode. My voice is starting to go. My voice is starting to go, and I got to record next week's YouTube videos after this. So wish me luck with that. But looks like we got another question from Maddie asking, so would you agree with this general guideline I use for all aspects of my training? Skill athleticism, off season equals develop, in season equals maintain, preseason equals sharpen. This is different for nutrition. Actually, I'm a fan of that approach. I actually think that works really well. I never really thought of it or put it into words like that, but I think for the most part that applies. I think it applies for nutrition as well. In season, in terms of body composition and performance, you definitely want to maintain. I'm kind of going back and forth in my head between maintain and maximize, because like maximize, you want to really maximize your performance in season and like really peak during the in-season phase so you can actually get the most out of your season. But also I think maintain works really well as well, just because a lot of athletes tend to struggle with maintaining their strength and performance and also maintaining their body composition. There's been research looking at, I believe it was soccer players, and they've also looked at football players. I'm not sure of any studies particularly looking at basketball players, but they look at these athletes, and usually over the course of their competitive season, they lose muscle mass and gain body fat, or like increase their overall body fat percentage, even if their weight doesn't really change that much, just because of the more sports specific activities rather than strength training. Like usually you'll see a decrease in strength training over the course of the season. In many cases, if it's a well-programmed or if it's a well-coached school with a good strength and conditioning program, usually you'll keep lifting during the season to kind of offset that, but you still see those negative changes occur. So your nutrition can definitely be used during your in-season. That's one of the functions of in-season nutrition, to maximize performance and also maintain your body composition and maintain those gains you made over the course of the off-season. Because when you think about it, that also puts you in the best position to maximize your progression over the course of your career. So a lot of times hoopers will make all this progress and then lose it during the season and then have to kind of get back to square one in the beginning of the off season and then make improvements. Whereas if you put in the effort, put in the time and really dial this in so you can maintain your progress over the course of the season, you don't have to kind of climb back to square one in the off season again. You can just immediately start progressing, and that's going to speed up the rate of progression over the course of your entire career. And obviously you might not see the fruits of that right away, but on a career long scale, you definitely see that show up. And if you're really trying to maximize what level you're going to play at, this is something you really need to consider. And that's where nutritional periodization is insanely important. But yeah, I agree. And then, yeah, preseason equals sharpen. Yeah, I mean, in terms of skills, definitely agree there. In terms of nutrition, I guess you could use the word sharpen. It's more so, it's kind of like ramping things back up, getting your calorie intake back up if it was lower for whatever reason during the off season. So making sure everything's kind of firing on all cylinders going into the next in-season phase. Jared, what's up? I appreciate you tuning in. Yeah, if y'all are on Facebook, go ahead and share this live video. I'd appreciate it. We got some people watching on YouTube, got plenty of subscribers on YouTube. By the way, if you're new on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and also like the video, because that also helps the algorithm and whatnot. And as a relatively smaller creator, it definitely helps. I would appreciate that. And if you're listening on the podcast, be sure to drop a 5-star rating and review down below if you're new around here, and subscribe for new episodes. You're probably listening to this on a Wednesday. I think I'm going to release these as a podcast every Wednesday. So yeah, it's some fun stuff. Let's see. Got another question from the comments. Hello, I'm 13 years old right now. I can touch the net pretty high. Do you have any tips on my road to dunking? So interestingly, I actually have a video on my YouTube channel talking about some nutrition tips for vertical jump. But in general, obviously you're going to want to be training correctly. And I'm not the best person to talk about training. PJF Performance is a really good resource for vertical jump training for basketball players. But in terms of nutrition, the main focus of your nutrition should be to fuel yourself to get the most out of that training. Because if you get the most out of that training, you perform really well in your training sessions. You perform your sessions with maximal intent. you're going to be able to get the most out of your training and progress at the fastest rate. Whereas if you're not fueled properly, you might be working super hard, but you're not going to get the same results because you weren't fueled properly and you weren't recovered properly between sessions. So my number one piece of advice would be make sure you're fueling your training sessions properly, because that's going to expedite that process and make this whole thing a whole lot faster and a whole lot more effective. Now, with that being said, there might be some cases, again, if you're very overweight or if you are, if you do have quite a bit of extra body fat, then you might benefit from cutting. Now, in your situation, you're 13 years old. I would not recommend you go into a cut or you try to decrease your calories or go into a fat loss phase. I would definitely recommend that you focus on performance. Unless you're significantly overweight, then that might change things. But overall, focus on performance and fueling for that during your training, eating plenty of carbohydrates, eating plenty of protein, and whatnot. By the way, I would go to hoopsquiz.com, take the quiz, kind of see where you're messing up and get the free video series. But overall, that'd be my recommendation. And then in terms of supplementation, creatine might be beneficial just because it could potentially, it's not going to increase your max vertical jump, but it's going to decrease the time that it takes between maximum vertical jumps. Whereas if one athlete who wasn't on creatine did a vertical jump, it might take them a minute to fully restore and fully get back to a place where they can repeat that vertical jump at the same height, same intensity. Whereas someone on creatine maybe shortens that time to 45 seconds. And those are completely arbitrary numbers, random numbers. Don't take that and run with it. But just overall, that's the main concept there. So you might consider supplementing with the creatine, not to mention there's a bunch of other benefits to it as well. I have a video on that on the channel too. But overall, that would be my recommendation. The biggest thing is just make sure you're fueling properly, so that way you get the most out of your training and you recover most effectively from your training, and you stay healthy enough to train for long enough to actually get those results. That would be my biggest advice. Let me know if that helps, if you have any follow-up questions off of that. But if you do that, you should be in a pretty good spot. Yeah, Maddie, exactly. So creatine will just help you with more max intent on our plyos. It's not going to really, actually, I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, but really the main thing is going to decrease the time between which you can perform at max intent, if that makes sense. Awesome. Let me know. We're going to wrap up here in about 5-10 minutes. So as you guys, and we got 5 people watching. So if you have any questions, go ahead and comment down below. And if you're listening on the podcast on Apple, on Spotify, wherever, we do these live Q&As every Saturday. And there's a dog barking outside. We do these live Q&As every Saturday. If you want to watch them live and tune in live and get your questions answered, it's on the YouTube channel, and you can find it there. But let's see if we can get some more questions in from Instagram. Let's see. So another question was asking about cheap sources of protein or vegetarian alternatives with high protein content. So, I mean, with cheap sources of protein, I think this is just understanding that you don't have to get organic everything. You don't have to get grass-fed everything. Obviously, if you can, then I would recommend going with organic and grass-fed. But if you don't have the resources or the finances, don't feel like you have to, and don't feel like it's a make or break thing, because it definitely is not a make or break thing. It's not going to make or break your progress at all. And eating conventional chicken breast is far better than eating a Big Mac. So don't kind of use that as a rationale not to pay attention to your nutrition. But in general, if you don't have the resources, that's totally fine. And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize, that not everyone can afford grass-fed or completely organic foods. And like, you shouldn't feel bad about that. You shouldn't feel like you're any less able to see progress because of that. Just get conventionally raised products and use that as a starting point, and you'll be totally fine there. One cheap protein source that comes to the top of my mind, and is super underrated, chicken drumsticks. They're crazy cheap, and it's like the same thing as regular chicken. So you can also use that to get your protein in. And that's a really good one that comes to mind. Chicken thighs are also a really good protein source that is relatively cheap. Chicken breast is crazy expensive. Chicken thighs has a very similar macro profile, slightly higher fat, but it's way cheaper. So you can go with that as well. Even the organic versions are not that expensive. So you can go with that as well. And then vegetarian protein sources, things that come to my mind. Tempeh is a really good one that has a high protein content. Lentils and beans, any other sort of legumes, plant-based protein powders. Ideally, you'll get a blend to account for the lack of essential amino acids in some plant-based protein sources and kind of make up for that incomplete amino acid profile. And then those should put you in a pretty good spot. There are some other ones, but that should be a pretty good starting point. Are there any exercises you prefer in the gym? Like I said, man, honestly, training is not really my area of specific expertise. So I don't really want to give you advice on something that I don't really know a ton about or enough to specifically program for you. But there are plenty of resources out there for training. In terms of nutrition, though, definitely refer to the other things I was talking about earlier. Awesome. So with that, I think I got through all the questions on my Instagram. I think I got through all the questions in the Facebook group. I don't think we got anything else. And does anyone have any last questions? I'm going to start wrapping it up. But if you have any other questions as we begin to wrap it up, comment down below and I'll get them answered before we officially sign off. But as always, if you enjoyed this, I'd really appreciate it if you drop a like on this video and go ahead and share it with a friend. If you're on Facebook, you can very easily share it to your timeline. That would be awesome. I'd really appreciate that. Even if you're watching in the past broadcast, still share the video. People will find a ton of value out of this. If you're on YouTube, definitely like the video. And if you're on YouTube, right after I'm done here, a new YouTube video literally just dropped. So definitely go from here, watch that video. Even if you go right now before I'm done and watch that video, it's going to help you a ton. I'm actually walking you through the exact thought process I use to build out a nutrition plan for basketball players that actually works. If you want to peek inside my mind, how I put together this stuff for my athletes, definitely check that video out. It's up right now. It dropped at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So check that out. I'd appreciate it if you drop a like on that, comment on that, and show it some love just to help the algorithm boost it a little bit. Last video just did not perform well at all. Don't know what happened with that one, but you have some of those days sometimes. So hopefully this one does better. Hopefully y'all enjoy it. And then let's see what else. Oh yeah, hoopsquiz.com. Take the quiz. I'm going to put the URL up on the screen right now. If you're on podcast, the link is down below. If you're on Facebook, it's already in the description. Just click that link, take the quiz. It'll take you like 3 minutes, and it's going to pinpoint exactly where you're messing up in your game right now with your nutrition and your training and help get you going in the right direction to really make the most out of this now extended off season and make next season your true breakout year. So definitely take that. Let me know what you think. And that'll also get you access to the Facebook group as well. And I believe that's it. So as always, I appreciate y'all tuning in. Make sure you drop a like on this video, drop a 5-star rating and review down below if you're on the podcast form listening. I'd really appreciate that. And with that, hopefully y'all enjoyed the Q&A, and we will be back for another live Q&A next Saturday here on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, there's going to be another episode out on Friday with a very special guest. I'm super excited for y'all to hear this one. And yeah, with that, have a great rest of your weekend or a great rest of your week, depending on when you're listening to this. And I will see you in the next episode.